Hey everybody! Today I want to teach you about some basic maintenance on your instrument and discuss some parts and just stuff like that. So today I'm going to be talking about how to take a string off of an acoustic guitar that has bridge pins. If you have a guitar that has what's called a string through bridge, in which case instead of these little pins holding it in, it actually just runs through the body, this is still useful. In fact, even if you have an electric guitar, this will still be at least mildly useful for you. But this is more centered, or this lesson's focused more on acoustic guitars with bridge pins. So first thing we're going to do is I'm just going to use just the one string. I'm not taking all the strings off my instrument. This is just me kind of showing you how it's done. First thing you do is do that and then see if it's going down. If the pitch is going down, that's deeper now, that means you know which way to turn it. Because certain tuners, depending on what side of the headstock you're on, and just if you had a guy that was crazy and decided to wind it backwards on there, then you just got to make sure you know which way you're supposed to twist your tuner. And pop that off. And now I have a string winder here, just a normal old string winder, but it's got an extra little attachment, and a lot of them do nowadays have an extra attachment for pulling bridge pins. So what you do is you take that and you slide it over the bridge pin like so, and then you just, well, let me get back on there, pull up. Dead simple. That's probably the easiest way to do it. Before I had good tools, and especially when I was first learning, I didn't know how to pull bridge pins, and so I was doing all sorts of crazy stuff like getting scissors or certain types of pliers or clamps or anything to just get a hold of that. I think one time I went with a flathead screwdriver and tried to pull that out, and the easiest way to do it is just get yourself a bridge pin pulling tool, or they make tools specifically for that job. And about bridge pins real quick, they have a little groove right here on, you might not even be able to see it on the camera, but there's a little groove right there, and that actually makes room for the string to sit. And then that string, the end of the string here, this is bent because it goes at an angle, goes down inside the body like so. That little ball end, that's what catches at the bottom of this string. Essentially it's just friction holding that in place, and it's a lot of friction. And this hole runs through to the inside of the body, so that's just a hole. You could actually, if you had like a good light, you could actually see the inside of the guitar through this little hole if you really wanted to. And then you take this ball in, because there's that little ball on the end of there, which actually it's more of like a thick hoop. I don't know that a ball is really the best way to describe that little piece, but that's what they call it, so that's what we're going to call it. You stick that back down in that hole, and this is now if you're putting a new string on. Stick that back in the hole. Take your bridge pin and make sure that that little groove is lined up with the string, so that you got room for the string, and pop that back in flush. And now pull. Boom. And pull it back up to the tuning pegs. That little post right there is where you stick it in, and pretty much all tuners, with the exception of some bass tuners, which we're not talking about bass really, but all tuners pretty much just have a little hole that the string goes into to catch, and then friction just holds it in place. Let me get that there. And remember which way you got to turn it so that it goes up in pitch. Now if you've got a string winder, this is actually what they were invented for. And so that will save your hand a lot of time and probably some cramps. And I have a string winder because I do a lot of guitar work. And now when you're getting this up to tension, I hold this at tension because this is a string that's pre-cut, so I know exactly how long it's supposed to be. But generally speaking, the best way to I'm not going to tune that just yet. But generally speaking, the best way to figure out how long you need your string, on most instruments it's usually set up so that if you take your string and measure up to the next post, that will give you roughly how long your string actually needs to be. That's usually how I do it, and then I just put like a little bend at the end of it, just a little bend at the end of the string, and get it so it sets there, and then you just start winding it up. And everybody, you'll probably, in the comment section of this video, you'll probably see people arguing about whether you should wind it so that each winding goes above or below. Personally, and this is just my preference because it actually doesn't really matter, but personally I find that it holds better tension or tuning stability if you make sure that each next wrapping goes underneath the one that's on there. So if you look at the post, which I don't even know if you can really see it all that well, if you look really closely, you can see the string went in, wrapped around, and then the next wrapping that wrapped around went underneath the first wrapping. And so that bottom wrapping comes straight off. And so I find that tuning-wise, your tuning stability seems to be a bit better. At least on this instrument, that's the case. There are instruments that I've had to do all sorts of wacky stuff with to get to stay in tune. And that might be a good lesson in the importance of just buying a well-made instrument to begin with. So let's talk about the actual parts of the guitar now. So we have the headstock and the tuners. Alright, and these are called the tuning post or pegs. It depends on where you're from, what exactly you call them, but these are just tuning. The tuners or the tuning machines, it doesn't matter. If you go into a guitar store and say, hey, I need a new set of tuners, they'll know what you're talking about. And then the string runs from the tuner over this white piece called the nut. And that nut, in this case, this one's actually, I think, plastic, but some are made out of bone, some are made out of brass or aluminum or steel, some are made out of wood. It doesn't really matter. Well, it will affect the tone of the instrument a bit, but that doesn't really matter too much. You run that through that groove and down to the bridge. Now this white piece is where the strings run over, and that's the second contact point. And as long as those 2 points are contacting, that's what you're tuning, is the open string, and then that's not in tune at all. And I'm going to cover tuning in just a second. And then each of these little metal pieces that runs across the fretboard is called, well, the fretboard where you put your fingers, that's called the fretboard, and the little metal pieces are called frets. That's the fretboard. Now as far as tuning, if you want to learn to tune by ear, I'm going to cover that real quick. So let's see here. So what I'm doing there is I'm hitting the 5th harmonic. You hear how they're not tuned? And what you want to do is just get those. Now that's tuned. So how did I do that? If you hit those harmonics, the 5th on the lower string and the 7th on the in this case the E string, and then the 7th on the A string, you see how that's ringing out without me touching it? What's going on there is when you hit that string, because of maths and physics, you end up with at the 5th and 7th fret, they're called harmonics, and when you hit one of those and let your finger off, it sings, or it sounds higher than the actual. And there's a whole formula for, like, okay, in this case that's, I believe, 2 octaves up. At the 12th fret it's 1 octave up, and I think that's either a 4th or a 5th or something like that. So but that's not really important. All we know is that the harmonic on the low E string at the 5th fret and the harmonic on the A string at the 7th fret are actually the same note when they ring out. So what you can do is actually, and then get those to sound the same. Now when you're getting really close, you can tell when they're not very close at all, and you just keep going up or down until you're pretty close to where you need to be. But suppose you're a little bit flat on this, and a little, compared to the other string that you know is in tune. What you got to start listening for, and the only way I can describe it is just this sort of wub. And basically, it sounds like if you've got a wavelength going like this, waving back and forth like that. You've got another one, and they're kind of like this. When you get a minor second going, that's the most dissonant sound you can get. And then what you want to do is get them to eventually and sync up like that. And so you can hear that. You can actually, your brain's wired to hear that. So don't freak out if you can't do it perfectly to begin with. Your brain's already wired to do it. So with a little bit of practice, you can get really good at it. And then once you get it where they're going, they sound the same, and you don't hear any more wub. They're in unison. They sound good to each other. Then check it with an actual fretted note to an open string. So in this case, the 5th fret of the low E and the A string are the same note, A. And they sound the same to me. I can't hardly tell the difference. So that's how I know that this string is now tuned to E because of the relationship between the other strings. And you can do that with all the strings. You kind of got to fudge it a little bit with the B or the G and the B string because the interval is different. And so you can, it's really best to just check that, you know, 4th fret G and open B. And I can't hear a difference there, so my guitar is in tune now. So hopefully that's helpful, because I know people that when they first start out, a lot of times they're taking their instruments to stores and paying money to have their instruments tuned. And certain places, if you buy a pack of strings, they'll tune the instrument for free. You know, they'll put the strings on there and tune it for free, and you know, they'll do stuff like that. But it's good for you to learn how to do these things for yourself. Because in all likelihood, you're not going to be the mega rock star that can have somebody change your strings for you. You need to learn to do it yourself. Now, hopefully, you can become the mega rock star and have somebody change your strings for you. But in all likelihood, you're going to be sitting around in your house, and when you break a string, you're going to have to change it yourself. So it's important that you learn how to do that. So hopefully, I've taught you something useful today. Thanks, and have a good day.